podcast. I don't remember what episode this is. 5, 6, whatever it is. Anyways, we're getting more consistent with it. That's what's important. You're listening to Blake Barlam here, and then I'm here with my co-host Chris Tapia. Chris, how you doing today?
What's up, man? I'm doing good. How are you?
Doing pretty good. Glad to be here on this Monday evening, February 9th, 2026. Hard to believe that February is actually flying by. I'm not gonna lie. January dragged its tail, but February is kind of getting gone.
Yeah, I know, and we're seeing the sun's still out at 5 o'clock, so
Hmm.
my attitude is definitely changing. It's
Yes.
seeing some better weather. Summer's coming, spring's
Hmm.
coming, and
I'm definitely
then
getting that summer bug.
yeah, I know, me too. That's cold weather spell that we had recently kind of created a hectic time, I think,
Hmm.
with everybody just trying to
Yes.
prepare for the weather and not really knowing. I know Oxford, North Mississippi got hit pretty bad. We didn't see a whole lot here in central Mississippi,
Yeah.
but thankfully, I think all that is kind of getting straightened out now. So we're on our way to, like you said, being more consistent with this. So yeah, thanks everybody for being on. And um, again, this is the Merge Mississippi podcast, like Blake said, episode 4, 5, 6, something like that. We'll keep better track of it. But the point is, we're trying to stay consistent. I think that is probably one of my goals for 2026 is being more consistent. And what we're trying to do with this. And as we said before, Merge Mississippi being the Magnolia States powerhouse movement, and what we're trying to become, dedicated to uniting Mississippians, the next generation, to do what's right to help defend the welfare of our state, of our nation, starting right here at home. Obviously, our organization, and just a little bit of what it's about, if you haven't heard, is just calling
Do
people
it right.
to build a more powerful, network of individuals that honor faith, family, freedom, country, and, like I said, to empower the next generation through unfiltered truth, to have those hard conversations in a world that's just really full of spin. Some of our agenda includes, like I said, aiming to become the leading movement for having these conversations of freedom fighting through modern, high impact conversation, focusing on delivering truth, news, information on the state, local, federal level. Really, that the current and the next generation is demanding. I mean, people are hungry for this stuff, so we're trying to do it no spin, just real talk, real opinion, from a biblical perspective. And like I said, our goal is to mobilize the young people, to mobilize communities, and do that on a faith centered, leadership style of what we should be doing and how we should be prioritizing our families, how we should be prioritizing liberty in Christ, and, like I said, aligning with those principles. Some of my favorites that I kind of have written down and pointed out come from, Galatians 5:1. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Deuteronomy 6:7, on passing on faith to the next generation, and really what we're trying to do here, encountering cultural and political challenges by fostering stewardship, justice, and truth and governance. My favorite one, Proverbs 11, and honest measures of what our system is, what it's becoming, and then what we can do as the next generation to help, bring these things to light, but also provide some resources on how people can get involved, what they can do. Um, some of the things we'll talk about tonight, as you and me discussed before we got started, are kind of our CCM week. Some of the topics that were discussed there by a couple of the state senators. Um, some hot topics like geoengineering, school choice, obviously the latest on what's going on there. One of the most important things that we've seen in our state that unfortunately doesn't gain a whole lot of traction, but we know it needs to, closing primaries, what we can do to see change in some of these elections. We talked about that earlier. And then we're kind of going to switch gears a little bit and just kind of backtrack on what it all means as Christians in the civic public arena and kind of what we should be doing.
Hmm.
We'll go over a little bit of some church and state history and just kind of the wall that we've seen built up there, Christians and politics, and just kind of what the Bible says and what we, in our opinion, kind of what that looks like. Um, so yeah, man, let's dive into it. If you're ready to go, I'm ready to go.
Man, I'm ready.
All right. So first off, the 2026 regular session of the Mississippi Legislature is in full swing. I think there's about 2 months left now. Um, we've seen a lot of bills come through. A lot of bills have been killed as soon as they go to committee. One of the biggest things that we saw in the latest developments of school choice, obviously, there's a big push on HB2, the Education Freedom Program Act of 2026. The bill aimed to significantly kind of expand school choice throughout several different kind of mechanisms, including the Magnolia student accounts, that kind of would allow parents to use these public funds for private school tuition, homeschooling, tutoring, etc. Um, it was going to be phased in universal eligibility, starting with a cap of about 12,500 students for the first year, and then it was going to scale up. So it was going to start small at first, kind of work out the kinks and see what was going on, and if it was working. Obviously, not every bill is perfect, and
Yeah.
bills sometimes are passed and things have to be changed. That's just kind of part of the process, amended. Um, it was also going to expand existing limited programs for students with special needs, dyslexia scholarships, etc. Some of the other reforms, such as charter schools opening up, some open enrollment options, and then obviously some teacher pay adjustments.
Hmm.
So it passed 6159 earlier in January, after there was some debate there. However, the Senate recently killed it on February 3rd. I think it was 3rd or the 4th that the Senate Education Committee rejected the bill in a bipartisan, unanimous vote after like 90 seconds. I was watching this
Yeah.
video earlier of the live stream of it, and it was literally like 90 seconds where not really any discussion, just kind of effectively dooming the package. These Senate leaders, including the education chair, just kind of cited a lack of appetite, uh, for lack of a better word, for the broad school choice vouchers and what that would entail. So there's still some concerns over diverting the funds from public schools to other priorities like teacher pay and other kind of education improvements. But as of right now, the current status of it is dead in its current form. There won't be any revival as is, but it's not entirely off the table. House Speaker White and other supporters kind of indicated that all options are still on the table. They could still try to attach some school choice provisions, like the ESA framework. They could attach some bills, attach some of these things to other bills via amendments. So, I mean, what do you think about that? Like, just the way they went into Senate and just like blew it off so fast.
Well, I think it's a continuation of what we've seen over the last few years as Delbert Hosemann has essentially just let his reign of terror loose on the state of Mississippi. I really don't think a lot of people understand how powerful the lieutenant governor is in Mississippi. Mississippi has one of the weakest governors in the country. And I'm not saying that as like an attack on Tate Reeves. I'm saying that the office, as far as the Constitution of Mississippi and how it's operated is concerned, is one of the weakest in the country. And they're trying to change that, and I think that should be the case because it's the governor is the executive branch of the state of Mississippi. and the executive branch should be equal, and not behind the legislative branch in Mississippi. But it just shows that Delbert Hosemann has a lot of power, and if he doesn't want something, it's probably not going to get through. He has a very staunch and loyal group of senators in the Mississippi Senate that are pretty much just yes men for him. And if he doesn't want something, they're going to vote that way.
Yeah, I mean, federally, Governor Reeves opted Mississippi into the new National Tax Credit Scholarship Program that would provide, additional uh, private school options starting in 2027. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we heard from a few of the state senators at the CCMS meeting this past week was just that, what Delbert wants, Delbert gets. And, it is a very powerful position in the state of Mississippi. Um, Especially, and it's kind of, I don't know if concerning is the right word. I think that's the right word that you have the governor, you have the front runners, both Andy Gibson, Shad White for governor of 2027, several state GOP leaders, 60 to 70, 80% in some surveys of public support that are showing more parental choice when it comes to school, especially for kids
Hmm.
with special needs. I mean, so we were talking about polls earlier. Like, are they actually listening to these polls? Like, do these guys think that these polls don't matter? Or I mean, are they? I mean, they're just sounds like they're just caring about what Delbert wants, and
Yeah.
for some reason, he's chose to basically seems like direct people to kill this bill, huh?
Hmm. That's exactly what it seems like, and it really just puts into perspective the choice that Mississippi has coming up in 2027. I said, I think I think in the first time I was on this podcast with you, I said that this year is going to be the last year that we get to see some stuff get done before 2027. 2027 is going to be an election year. No one's going to try to vote on anything extremely controversial because of that. This year was going to give you your telltale sign on what these people are really made of. And we have seen that the Senate will back down and the House is willing to get aggressive. And I think that just shows that this is the choice that Mississippi has. Which direction do you want to go? Do we turn back to the Mitt Romney, Paul Ryan GOP, or do we look forward with, the more America First MAGA movement? And that's the choice I think that we have.
Yeah, House leaders are definitely criticizing the Senate for just kind of going along with the status quo and kind of what has been. Definitely not, it doesn't seem like they're listening to parents and people that support this bill. Like I said, 60, 70, 80% in some surveys that are showing they're for. We could watch for some amendments to new bills that could come up.
Yeah.
The opposition from the Senate remains pretty strong, focusing on public school funding and equity concerns. But like I think kind of like we've said, and I think that most people that look at school choice are saying that this is a thing about empowering families, and just kind of fostering competition and kind of what it's supposed to be. So, I mean, it begs the question, like, as Christians and school choice and what that means, because that's what we're trying to do is kind of tie all this back to biblical perspective.
Hmm.
I look at what is, wrong with public schools, there's good things, don't get me wrong, but I mean, it begs the question, like, if you see that 60, 70, 80%, I mean, I would say probably Mississippians would identify themselves to be Christian or religious. And I feel like most of that same group, not saying that if you're, for opposed school choice, but I mean, if you look at the stats and the numbers, I mean, it kind of aligns with
Hmm.
the people that say they are for these Christian values and because they simply want their kids to be in an education system that values, prayer and the Bible and, the lack thereof of some of these, things that are being taught in our schools. So I mean, it kind of begs the question, like, why do we put our children, into this system that, you know, tolerates a lack of school choice, and especially in the country, and in a system where the Bible and prayer is even banned from our system. I mean, that's
Hmm.
it's pretty immoral when you think about it. That,
Yeah.
and it's not a knock against, anybody that is against school choice by any means, but you have to think, I don't know if we should want any of our young people, growing up thinking that they're getting an education without any kind of communion with God, or any kind of
Hmm.
scripture in the
Yeah.
classroom, or any kind of prayer in the classroom. And it got me thinking, my time at Bellhaven, I was like, man, the Bible was a textbook in every single class. It didn't matter what class you were in, every single, if you weren't praying before you started class, it was tied back to, how is this biblical? What's the worldview on this? Where does this make sense? Where is it scriptural? And that's what it allows you to think outside the box, and not only that, but to have a lot more thankfulness for what you're learning, and to apply it, because I mean, that's, where you're learning right and wrong, you're learning ethics, you're learning morality. um I think of people kind of saying, school choice, and homeschooling, and charter schools are just like an experiment that don't work. But I mean, people have been homeschooling for thousands of years, and I
Yeah.
mean, public education has really been more of the experiment. And look where that got us.
Hmm.
Look how well that's gone. So, we could go down the whole of, the public education system that a lot of people really don't want to talk about, but I mean, we'll talk about it. Just,
Yeah.
how it was kind of set up under a fascist, system by Prussian military models of, places of creating just, worker bees, and just kind of
Hmm.
uh, to be in these factories and to be workers. And that just kind of started to stamp out like you know, any kind of development for, creative entrepreneurship, and for free thought. So I mean, we've banned public I mean, prayer in public schools, because it's offensive. But we're not banning drag queen story time because it's free speech. So it makes you wonder what's worse for kids. um Obviously, we know the answer to that, but it's
Yeah.
just kind of sad. Like I said, that's just kind of the way I think about it. Is that, I don't, I certainly personally don't want my kids, involved in that kind of stuff. I like to know what they're learning. I like to have a say in that. And thankfully, we chose the ultimate school choice of homeschooling. I know not
Hmm.
everybody is able to do that, but continuing the conversation is at the very least what we could have expected from the Senate, to try to, hey, if you don't like something in this bill, pull out the things you don't like. Like, let's have a conversation. Let's try to build something that works for people, so they do have that ability, as opposed to just kill it in general. Just kind of like, because this is what we were told, or because, we don't like it. Because
Yeah.
60, 70, 80%, one could argue, where's that polling coming from? But you have to think, like, were you listening, to the people, and kind of in this polling and what it says. So, strange turn of events there. Certainly not the last we're going to hear of it this session. I think we're going to see a lot more in the coming weeks. Like I said, I think there's going to be some things that come through, and hopefully they're able to do it. So, we'll see. At least for the parents, at least for, I think we can agree, just getting the bureaucracy out of public education,
Absolutely.
um, taking out the bloat of, these administration level positions that, in my opinion, are just, we have teachers that are barely, but we have administrators that are, making six figures, and they're not the ones in the classrooms, and I've heard them argue like these politicians aren't in the classrooms teaching. Like, well, neither of those guys. So I'm definitely for teachers, getting more money, getting a raise. My wife teaches our kids. I don't know how she does it. She doesn't get paid for it, but I think the ones that really want to, I credit them so much for the work that they're doing and being able to, help these kids, especially the ones that are underfunded and the kids with disabilities. I commend them tremendously for the work that I couldn't do it. I could not be a school
Absolutely.
teacher. So kudos to them. I'm praying for them, and hopefully we'll see some traction on that. I think they did pass a teacher pay raise, so that's good.
That I saw
Um,
that. I think the Senate even passed that one.
I think they're trying. Yeah, I think they're trying to just kind of stop the conversation there. By saying, "Hey, we got your raise, so here's another reason why we don't
Mhm.
need it." Um, we obviously saw the other bills that kind of came through. They were trying to target some homeschooling, more guidelines on that also just didn't make it through. Fortunately for that, because I mean, what's the point of uh, getting even more guidelines and restrictions on homeschooling when the whole point is to pull out from that kind of stuff. So we'll see what happens. Some other things kind of going on in the legislator that were pretty interesting. We heard about a little bit at our CCMS meeting this past week. Geoengineering. What do you know about geoengineering?
It's not
You an expert on that?
something I'm super educated on. I know the general idea of it, cloud seeding, stuff like that. But it's not something that's why I was kind of interested to learn about it a little bit at the meeting the other night because I'm not super well versed on it. Um, but I think there's absolutely some merit to it, and I think that's why you've seen such opposition to it. If it was just some conspiracy theory or whatever, there wouldn't be such strong opposition both from the government or lobbying firms and companies to stop the bills that try to ban it. So that's my opinion on it.
Yeah, so I'm not a huge expert, like you said. I think, a lot of people would kind of call it conspiracy theories and chemtrails and weather modifications and is it real and what are they doing or is it just, the lines that the planes make? Um, the conversation that I heard the other night was that this is very much a real thing, and this is coming from state senators right here in Mississippi. Kudos to them who are putting these bills out and trying to get them passed to kind of stop the intentional, engineering of the atmosphere, and it's basically just releasing chemicals into the atmosphere to, like you said, do cloud seeding. Um, there's
Hmm.
different kind of ways that they can do it to create weather to try to whether it's that or try to increase global warming to push the global warming cause. The most active bill is the one that we heard about 2418, titled the Environmental Protection to Prohibit Geoengineering. Senator Jason Barrett was on hand Thursday to kind of give us an overview about it and kind of what that entailed. So basically, excuse me, it declares that some legislative findings on geoengineering, cited that there is risk to health and the environment, and that it is causing pollution, and to help kind of control the law into the intentional injection of these chemicals or release of these chemicals into the atmosphere that affect temperature, like I said, the weather, sunlight intensity. There's different kind of reasons that it can be done, and even like you said, what he didn't know a whole lot about it either. I mean, I don't think there's too many people in the Senate, Mississippi State Senate, that are probably experts on it. Maybe there
Yeah.
are. I asked the question. I was like, who is the biggest lobbying firm pushing against this, or he said he didn't know, but he did say that as soon as the bill was introduced, he got an email um, from a company. I think called Rainmaker or something like that, that basically was urging him to not propose the bill, like to get rid of it, to stop, not move forward with the bill. So he was kind of shocked that almost instantly, I think that day, you know, there is a company that reached out to him and was like, "Hey, don't do this. Don't put it out
Mhm.
there. Like, we want to keep doing this for whatever reason." So, it's interesting that, we have to have bills that prohibit these kind of activities, in Mississippi, in our skies. But it's definitely something that, is going on. But what I was going to say is it's interesting how, his just plain and simple thought was he didn't want to see people playing God with the
Yeah,
weather in Mississippi.
100%.
And I mean, that's something that we can just really agree on, don't you think?
Absolutely. Because that's, I mean, that's true in all different sorts of life. I think the same can apply from not just the geoengineering, but the way that, I think there's also engineering in food and diet and everything like that, but also, the mutilation of children. And the LGBTQ community, trying to play God with switching genders and, creating life. I think there's some, truth to that for IVF as well. I mean, all the stuff of like playing God. I mean, it really shows that it's the devil is at the forefront of a lot of these things that we don't really think about. And that's my opinion. I'm not saying that all the people pushing this are demonic spirits or anything, but there's certainly been influence. I mean, why in the world would people want to control our weather, control what goes into our food, um, and cut genitals off of babies if there's not some ulterior motive to it. You know what I mean? So that's sort of my opinion on it, is that it speaks to a larger issue on control, and that we're probably not as free as we think we are.
Yeah, I mean, you said it, and I think it's you know, there is something I was watching the other day where, they, you know, are trying to make this stuff more normal, make it more common and make it more normal to where eventually people are just kind of accepting of it, that you're not asking questions. They keep people so divided by halftime shows and these, what's going on in Minnesota, and just kind of like so distracted that they are doing these crazy things that, 10 years ago sounded absolutely crazy, but as we're seeing now, even with like the Epstein stuff, is coming out to be pretty pretty true. There's still a lot to be said about that. We won't get too much into it, but I mean, it's part of the conversation. It has to be said that there is some evil at work. The enemy's always working, and we just have to work harder to kind of have this stuff exposed and talk about, whether it's geoengineering, like you said, whether it's the, encouraging uh, children to, change their gender, to not understand what boys are, to not understand what girls are. I mean, this is just common sense stuff that, hopefully parents are talking to their kids about and not just playing a blind eye, because unfortunately there are, even schools that, we're seeing in the libraries, there's conversations that are happening. There's classes that are being taught. There's stuff being sprayed in the sky. If we're not having these conversations, like you said, I mean, there's some evil at work through these things, and it has to be discussed, it has to be talked about, and then it has to be held accountable. I mean, we have to figure out, what we're going to do, rather than saying, this is a Republican problem, this is a Democrat problem, this is a conservative or liberal issue. Like, these are things that are affecting all of us. And I mean, we have to look back at it, like, what does the Bible say? Like, what is scriptural about how wrong these things are, and what, is supposed to be and what's not supposed to be, and kind of go from there. And I think if we were spending more time kind of uniting as that, we would be able to actually have more influence and understand what to do about this stuff. So I think first it comes to, understanding what it is, what's real, what's not, and then comes time for we're able to point this out. Let's just use closing primaries or school choices as an example. We know those are two pretty big uh, popular topics right now. Probably not as popular as they should be, but those are ways where things can happen behind your back, whether it's the open primary system, um, or whether it's the lack of, choice that a parent has and being able to understand what their kid is being taught. Because if the kids aren't learning it, they're not going to know about
Yeah.
it. It's going to happen in the future. If it's happening in the future and primaries are still open, and whoever wants to get elected can get elected because they can cross over vote. It's all tied together. There's a reason that these bills die. There's a reason that this stuff doesn't get pushed through harder. There's a, and there's, we're gonna talk about that more probably in the next show about really how we're able to mobilize more when it comes to election cycle, because we got elections coming up. I think we need to know where to focus on some of these elected officials and what they're doing. Take closing primaries for example. Senator Don Hartness was also there at the meeting Thursday night. He had a bill 2593, party primaries, you know, and having them closed in Mississippi, because right now Mississippi operates on an open primary
Hmm.
system. Um, this was introduced in January, and its kind of aim was to switch Mississippi from, like I said, the current open primary system where voters can basically just choose uh, which party's primary they want to vote in without declaring affiliation to a closed system. So, lots of pros and cons here when it comes to what side you're on and what side you're taking. But it's basically saying, only voters registered or affiliated with a specific party could vote in that party's primary.
Hmm.
We could look at it as like, well, is this more division? Is this like trying to put people in a label or labeling themselves? You know, in a way, yes. But I think you have to ask, where does my principle lie in who is voting? Because there's Republicans and there's Democrats that killed these bills. Um, or there's Republicans and there's Democrats who are voting against these bills. So while the primary being closed is important, I think it's more important to first identify, you know, who these folks are, and then also take the steps to having the primaries closed. So
Yeah.
you're just really trying to choose what's right and what's wrong, not necessarily who's right or who's left. I mean, once we establish what's right, we can figure out who's wrong and kind of go from there.
Hmm.
And then honestly, closing primaries just kind of helps seal it up. So whenever there are qualified candidates that you can have to run against these guys, they're not having all this crossover voting and pulling people out of the woodwork to vote for the person that's going to keep voting for, geoengineering, person that's going to keep voting against closed primaries. So that's where you have to target it. If it's Republicans that are voting for it, guess what? We'll go after them too.
Absolutely.
It doesn't matter. This is, like I said, this is about right or wrong, and kind of these folks that are not really listening to the people when it comes to what's important to them. Um, it also included provisions for uh, executive committees to kind of set qualifications. There's penalties for voter fraud, which there should be, voter ID and stuff like that. The bill died in committee. Again, so it was referred to Senate Elections Committee on the 19th, but received no further action, no hearings, no amendments, or no votes to advance it. So, I mean, what does that say to you? Like right there.
It just tells me that this is the game that they're playing, right? And it speaks to what we were talking about earlier with Delbert Hosemann. I mean, Delbert Hoseman's a Democrat, and you'd be pretty hard pressed. I don't know a single Delbert Hosemann voter. I'll put it that way. I could probably count on one hand how many people I know voted for Delbert Hosemann. And these are the same people that would tell you Roger Wicker is a MAGA senator, even though he voted against the border wall. Last week, even was criticizing ICE being in Mississippi with the detainment center. So that just puts it in perspective who these people are. Um, but it shows that they rely on Democrat voters in primaries so that they can usurp the will of the people, the base of the Republican Party in Mississippi. That's the game that they play. They rely on this. We saw it with Chris McDaniel in his Senate run, Chris McDaniel in his Lieutenant Governor run, Michael Cassidy in his Congress run. We see it time, Gannon Burton even in 2024 to an extent, against Roger Wicker. We see it time and time again, and it's a middle finger to the people of Mississippi, and specifically the conservative voters that they claim to represent.
Yeah, I think it kind of, like you said, it really shows the game that they're playing when it's like, why would we close primaries whenever, if we don't think that we're going to be doing so good,
Mhm.
we can go and pull votes from somewhere else and have those votes cross over to help us win.
Yeah.
So it's pretty disturbing. I mean, I think that goes to the same, it's all in the same basket of, it's not Republican or Democrat because there's Republicans and Democrats that voted against it. So it's like, what are you trying to protect? And they're obviously trying to protect their position. They're obviously just trying to protect their title, their status, whatever it is. Um, and if you knew that you could cut out the cheating, if you knew that you could cut out the possibility of cheating, why wouldn't you be for that? Like, I don't
100%.
understand. So it definitely speaks volumes as to with the bill being killed in committee so fast that, you know, they're clearly aware of what's going on and they're clearly aware that, they're just not on the right side of this issue because while it's hard to prove, I think we have seen in several instances recently where voter fraud, whether it's voting machines, whether it's crossover votes, whether it's buying votes, it happens. There's a pretty interesting discussion coming up with a speaker. I can't remember his name, coming up soon. We'll post that later. That is going to talk about kind of election integrity and how important election integrity is. That has to do with our voter rolls as well being cleaned up because I mean there's just a ton wrong with our voter rolls in Mississippi. From what I understand right now, the Secretary of State really can't do anything when it comes to counties. It's kind of up to the local
Yeah.
uh, clerks to kind of clean that up.
Which
Um,
that sort of speaks to just how corrupt. I hate to talk about my state like this, but we have been ranked as one of the most corrupt states in the country. I mean, look at how our system's set up, where the Secretary of State and the state auditor are almost useless if Lynn Finch in the Attorney General's office doesn't do anything. I mean, what's the point of these
mhm.
agencies if no one's going to act on the work that they do? I mean, anyone that sits here and tells you with a straight face that there isn't voter fraud in Hinds County is high as Scooter Brown. It's just not true. Like, so that, sorry, I just, you said that, it made me think about it. Just look at how our state's set up and look at how much they're willing to do to protect that system.
Yeah, I mean that goes for the primaries. That goes for campaign finance reform. That goes for. I mean, I know somebody right now that's heavily tracking some money and some campaign finance stuff that we're going to see come out pretty soon, and you're going to see some folks hopefully start to think before they run for reelection because if there's any qualified candidates to run against them, they're going to have a lot of ammunition against these guys. And
Mhm.
these are pretty well known names that are just taking advantage of the system, that are using these campaign resources and donations that come from the Joe down the road that only has $20 to put towards a campaign that's trying to make a difference. And these guys are blowing that money on trips. They're blowing that money on dinners. They're blowing that money on parties. They're blowing it on just stuff other than trying to run the reelection campaign because they're doing the right thing. They're trying to sway other people. They're in this pay to play system. I was having a conversation with somebody tonight who, said that, Mississippi politics kind of operates in the gray.
Hmm.
And, they even said, you just kind of have to learn that that's the way it is and it's not going to change.
Yeah.
And I just like I had to disagree. I was like, you know what? Let's agree to disagree because I see it as right. I see it as I'm pretty black and white. Like I don't see it as we have to accept that gray, that we have to accept that pay to play system, that we have to accept the status quo, that we have to accept the scratch my back, I scratch yours. Like there's laws and there's systems set in place. Like you said, there's these agencies that are there for these checks and balances, but they're not able to do anything because there's just certain people that are taking advantage of it that are helping protect, um, to keep these bills from happening and from passing, pushing their influence on these senators and congressmen to vote against them. So, hey, we'll help you get reelected and we'll endorse you and we'll throw some money behind you, but you cannot vote for closing primaries. You
Hmm.
know, lobbying firms, hey, we will donate to your campaign, but do not vote for that geoengineering bill.
Yeah.
That's like, that's how it works. It may not be said straightforward like that, but it is said in roundabout ways. It's done with handshakes, it's done with winks, it's done with nods, it's done behind closed doors. One of the other things we talked about with some of these committees being broadcasted, so people can see just kind of like, this is what I'm paying for. Like this is what my money that I'm donating to these can because it takes money to run campaigns, and we were talking about that earlier. Like first, you got to find the qualified, good people to run against these folks, then you got to fund these campaigns. And then you got to have really good reasons, why the other guy is just not it anymore.
Hmm.
And maybe I said that backwards. There's plenty of reasons why some of these folks just aren't it anymore, whether it's Republican, whether it's Democrat. Then we have to really unite as Christians in politics, kind of behind the same cause of the things that we can see are morally wrong, like trying to play God with our weather or openly pretty much saying we're okay with cheating in our elections, or it's the hey, let the government control your kids and you have no say in that. Like, if when you say it like that, it's kind of should be a no brainer of, well, of course, as a Christian, I'm not for any of those things. Well, then why aren't you saying something? Why aren't you holding these people more accountable?
Yeah.
Um, where do we get more involved? What do we do? So, that kind of will segue us into the next couple of things that we'll talk about. And really what a big part of what this is about. And that's kind of talking about church and state. So, obviously, what we're doing is we're talking about the state, we're talking about how these things revolve around a biblical Christian perspective and what it kind of means, um, what that statement means, the separation of church and state. Because I think, if there wasn't that separation, I'll just start by saying this, we would have more Christians involved in the political system. I think most people claim that, I was having this conversation with someone over lunch the other day, and there's folks that claim to be, um, not, I'm not trying to speak badly of anybody that is trying to live a better life at all, but they're not fulfilling their duty as it calls us to get involved in this system
Hmm.
simply because there's been this facade that there needs to be that separation. So I was watching something the other day, a video that kind of was talking about the separation of church and state, and it was just kind of saying how it's been widely misunderstood and over applied kind of in modern politics in modern America, in law, in culture, And I think that's right where they want it. That's right where some of these folks want it that are pushing these, whether it's hidden agendas, whether it's the evil stuff that's going on, whether it's the cheating, whether it's the money. I mean, they don't want good people involved. They don't want
Mhm.
the spotlight on them
Yeah.
because that's how they get away with this stuff. The separation, the word separation of church state doesn't even appear
Yes.
in the US
Nowhere
Constitution.
near the Constitution of the United States.
Yeah, and many, people think that it does and that it's supposed to be in there. And I've heard that plenty of times, like, well, there's separation of church and state, like we're not supposed to talk. Like, that's not true at all.
Yeah, you
Um,
could walk probably I think, if you ask just random people off the street, a majority of them would tell you that it is in the Constitution, even though it's nowhere near it.
yeah, and so I was doing some research, looking at some stuff, and because I was interested, like I really want to, make sure that we're going about this in a way of we're not just talking about this stuff to call people out to try to flip seat. The Danbury Baptist Association in Connecticut, and it was first described in the First Amendment as creating a wall of separation between the church and state, to assure Baptists that the federal government would not interfere with their religious practices or establish a national religion. And that kind of explains it all right there. So, but since then, it's kind of remained pretty obscure for, 150, 200 years now.
Mhm.
And it just kind of all got buried. And we've taken it and kind of ran with it. And it's like, don't talk politics in church, don't go to this event, this political event, and start talking godly and Christian views. And, because what happens? People feel convicted, like people, and that's what we want. We want people to feel
Yeah,
convicted over this.
100%.
Um, but the actual text from the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So this was to prevent the federal government from actually establishing a national religion, and which was pretty common in Europe at the time. They were obviously pushing Catholicism over there,
Yeah, I was gonna say
mainly.
the difference isn't like Muslim, Buddhist, and Christianity. The difference is denomination of Christianity. The founders clearly understood that if America was going to survive, it needed to have the ideals of a Christian nation and ideals that were led by God, not man. And I think that they would be rolling in their graves if they saw the mutilation of our culture right now.
Exactly. And I mean, I look, this person I was having a conversation with, we play kind of devil's advocate to each other in the sense of like we try to like prove my theory wrong. Let's try to like have the argument from the other side because and we agreed, like when we go back to the Bible, when we go back to faith and we go back to religion, people could say, well, some of the founders were, not so great guys. Probably so. Some of the founders, owned slaves. Probably so. The point was, if you're Christian and if you're religious, whether it was 150 years ago or whether it's today, particularly obviously Bible based faiths, are, like you said, they've been essential to America
Mhm.
and our moral foundation. And, um, we could see that in Washington's farewell address. The religion and morality are indispensable, uh, and supports of our political prosperity. There's references to our Creator in the Declaration of Independence. Overall, an acknowledgement of God in our documents that we live by today. These laws that guide us, these laws that protect us, which were all similarly based off, I mean, let's face it, the Ten Commandments, the laws that God gave Moses. You know, and this perspective has been held through like the 19th and 20th century, with religion, particularly Christianity, kind of being uh, seen as the supportive effort in this public life of politics and what we should be doing. So, yeah, I think it was 1947 that this that establishes no stricter or strict separation interpretation going beyond preventing, establishing, or promoting or prohibiting any government encouragement of religion. So, they basically said, yep, because he said it here, because there is nothing else to go off of. So they're like, well, he said it there. So that means there's supposed to be a separation of church and state. And that's not what he was talking about at all. And let's go back and we'll talk about this in a second. But even in the Bible, I mean, it's pretty ironic that these views, and even where the Declaration has references to the Creator, that the comments from some of these justices, were that we are religious people whose institutions presuppose a supreme being. How it's kind of contradicting, like how can you say those things but then say that there's supposed to be a separation of church and state?
Hmm.
But that those rulings kind of created more of a strict separation between the two, banning school prayer, like we were talking about earlier, even generic and non-denominational prayer, and contributed to removing even the Bible from public life in
Hmm.
schools, just piece by piece. They started
Yeah.
to kind of tear it away because they knew, like, if we have kids learning about the Bible and learning about the Creator and learning about religion, like they might know right from wrong and they might start to hold us accountable and they might start to be involved and try to, be good stewards and good neighbors. Instead, let's just fill them with a bunch of junk, so they can kind of forget. And that's just kind of what we've been led to. So, I think this shift kind of correlates again with these negative trends of declining marriages, birth rates, less people giving to charity, rising crime, fatherless homes, the school behavioral issues. All this stuff is implying that the change of taking away the church from the state really harmed, like, America's moral infrastructure. And it's all stemming from that one vote, in that one court case, like I said, in that one letter, one sentence 150 years ago. And it's kind of stuck since then. Also, like, begs the question, like, why hasn't that been changed? I think we just saw, Trump, trying to put prayer back in schools as like kind of a mandate. Like I was saying earlier about, attending school at Belhaven, how fortunate I felt for, having the Bible and scripture as kind of a textbook and guideline to everything we were learning, from business ethics to business principles, to political theory, to scope and methods of political science. I mean, all that stuff, just kind of teaches us where this whole, you know, America's project, if you will, intended religion to play a, supportive role in our public life and in our moral life. And, you know, like we said earlier, evil has been at play ever since. It was not meant to be excluded, from our government or our society, but we've just kind of, the further we've gotten away from it, I mean, look what's happened.
Hmm.
Because of Charlie Kirk's ability to put the two together and explain where it came from, why it was true and why it was real, why it mattered, and just kind of backed it all up. Because whenever you can't argue the Bible, you can't argue scripture.
Yeah.
You can argue Republican policies, you can argue Democrat policies, you can argue everything all day long, but you can't argue what's in the center. And I think that's what they knew was like, if we can just take that out of there and we can get rid of people understanding what's right and not what's wrong, like we can pretty much get away with anything. So yeah, I mean, what do you think about that? Like it's just
Yeah.
it's pretty crazy.
100%. I mean, we have seen as our country has moved. I was talking about this earlier on the on D and K with Kim. Is that we since I would honestly say the 60s and 70s we have seen America just drift and drift and drift and drift away from God, and homicide rates have gone up, poverty rates have gone up, mental health disorders have gone up. All drug abuse has gone up, alcoholism has gone up, all of these things that have just made like our nation has just been suffering from it. And it's because we lack the fear of God. It's because we lack a nation that looks up to God and worships God and not government. I think it is so obvious that that's the case. I mean, not to talk about the halftime show as this big divisive thing, but we have seen a trend of, I would say, the last, I don't know, 10 15 years of honestly like a sexual perversion of the halftime show. Something that's supposed to be entertaining for the family sport that is the NFL, has turned into this, lust filled, almost satanic like performance. And that's true from the halftime show to the Grammys to all Hollywood in general. And it showcases how our society has drifted from God and how we are worse off because of it. And I am forever grateful that we have a president and a government and an administration that is trying to change that.
Yeah, I think like you said, I mean, there's definitely been a shift in society and in our youth. And like you said, it's obvious that there's been an effort to sideline Christianity. This isn't new. And like we said, we have to emphasize just the foundational role of Christianity, you know, if Christian faith in American history and how that's affecting, our freedoms and our moral fabric, like you said, what's becoming more normalized. I mean, I have 3 little girls now, and, I could not let them watch I was on a halftime
Mhm.
show there for a minute because I was like, "No," you know? I mean, since we're on the topic, I watched both of them just because I was like, "Let me just see what let's just see," because I like to be in the middle of things. I like to say, "Okay, well, like, there's this, and then there's this." Like, I honestly didn't think both were great.
Yeah.
I definitely give it to TPUSA for being more family friendly, like you said, and kind of what it was supposed to be. But
And the messaging as well. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just want to say this before you get to your main point, but like everyone knows, Kid Rock had a problematic past and everything, but the meaning behind the show was that he came out as Kid Rock, Ball with the Ball, his most popular song from 1999. But then, it was like almost like a baptism where he came back, he dropped his stage name and he was his actual person, and he sung a song about how we are a fallen people and we need to give our life back to Christ and do that until you can. And that was the
yeah,
message of it. And I think regardless of the talent, the skill, the entertainment, whatever, that is a message that should be put on the America's largest stage.
absolutely. That's what I was gonna say. Was just that, whatever show you decided to watch, I beg people to question like what filled you from that, like what did you get filled with? Was it the music, was it the words, but like you said, I mean, it's hard to not want people to change. It's not, it's good to see that we can acknowledge that, you know let's face it, we all probably have a past and have done things that we aren't very proud of. But to be able to get up there and to even talk about that, like, you're gonna get criticized either way. But I mean, what was filling your soul? I mean, was it, the booty shake, or was it the testimony from
Yeah.
somebody that we knew, probably didn't live a very good past, in the whole rock and roll music scene, that is now saying, "Hey, give your life to God, like,
Yeah.
give your life to Christ." Like, Republican, Democrat, I don't care who you are. I mean, there is two different messages there, plain and simple. So that's why I give it up to PUSA for doing that, because um, that I think that was the whole point of it. And while some may argue that, look, I come from a Hispanic background. I heard people saying, "Well, this is just, so much about the culture and this and that." I'm like, look, don't tell me that, like, I get it, like, but that's what me and my wife were talking about this, like, what does it do for you? Like, I mean, I listen to mainly, worship gospel, I mean, Christian music. Now I didn't used to. I mean, I used to listen to everything.
Hmm.
And now listening to stuff, it just doesn't sound the same, because the words, the lyrics, the meaning, the lifestyle, the people behind them, like, who are they? What are they doing? Like, are they putting off the message that you want your kids to hear? We were talking about our kids now, like, we have worship music playing in the car and they're singing along to it. Like, imagine that it was something else that we had playing, like, guess what? They're going to sing to it. They're going to remember it. They're going to start to wonder what that is. Uh, Dogging anybody for um, what they chose to listen to, or choose to listen to, or what show they chose to watch. I do beg, the question of asking, what were you filled by with that? Was it the Holy Spirit, or was it just a good time? And
Hmm.
I've always heard, if it's a good time and it makes you feel good real quick, suddenly it's probably not good for you.
Hmm.
And I mean, I think that's probably what we would have got from that. So, anyways, back on track a little bit. So, back to church and state, about our true history been made, and the and our freedoms. Um, so there is a story from the Revolutionary War, just a little bit of history. 1777. So British blockades caused a shortage of many goods, including Bibles, essentials for families, and public worship, to kind of sustain a national morale. So just think about that. Imagine COVID. Continental from Holland for quicker way to get some more. They ordered 30,000 copies to be printed in the United States. And on the front page of that was the first American Bible, kind of acknowledged it was ordered by the United States Congress. So this was, a time whenever, like, you don't see that nowadays. And I think, I think I recently heard of that, was Trump was like trying to say, like, the Trump, first, something like that. And
Yeah.
This was happening. The government was actually seeing that, hey, look, we're in a bad place. They didn't order, 30,000 copies of Dr. Seuss they ordered 30,000 copies of the
Yeah.
Bible to, like I said, increase kind of on with the war. So then in 1854, this is pre-Civil War, critics claim that government involvement in activities should not be taking place, and it violated the whole church and state argument. And the House Judiciary responded by kind of should support Christianity. It's crazy how even back then we were having, these discussions were being had so much about Christianity, and you just don't really see it or didn't see it previous administrations. I'll give it up to our administration now that it is much more of a topic of conversation. They're trying to get it back in our
Hmm.
schools, and trying to get people discussing it more because, I mean, I think, like we said earlier, Christianity has been uh, the most consistent force for maintaining just American liberty and freedom and the nation's founding just kind of onward and where we are now. And anybody that argues that, I ran into somebody last year, I think, that was, um, we're in Mississippi. This is what they said. They said, we're in Mississippi, and if they see this, they're going to laugh because they'll know who they are. We're like, most people in Mississippi don't align with a religion. We don't live in a Christian state. You know, 7 out of 10 people don't go to church. It was just like some random blown out facts that, we are not a Christian country, and that it's almost like we're just more free thinking atheists. And that's kind of where we are, and that's kind of what we should be, and we should just accept it and adopt it, and that was the end of story. Needless to say, I stopped surrounding myself, or needless to say, I'm not around that person anymore. Thank God, just because it's just not true. Not true at all. We as Christians have been too timid. I think even bullied to discuss and focus on, the kind, or be too kind over being holy of what we should be saying about the religion and about Christianity. Um, and even our churches, our workplaces do that a lot. Unfortunately, you see it in some workplaces, like, don't talk about it, don't discuss it. We don't do politics at work. We don't do, religion at work. Um, but we've been prioritizing kindness as if it overrides, our biblical commands and what we should be doing as Christians. Um, and what we ask, what should we be doing as Christians? But we have to view the current trends and what's going on as potentially really the crumbling of America's grand experiment if we don't do something um, to kind of rekindle the courage of people to first, become followers of Christ. Second, get involved in the church, and also get involved in politics and in government. We should be going into the public square. We should be going into our corporate boardrooms, hospitals, university campuses, and allowing this um, to be there. I mean, it has every right to be there. And I think, without that, we're just going to keep declining each generation. And, this is again what we're trying to do here is each generation, you, me, my kids, we have to have a belief in faith and in transformative power in faith. We have to experience it individually first, and then we have to kind of extend that, collectively to the community in order to leave a legacy of faith and not just to forget about where we came from, which was first and foremost God, and second, our country that was built on, Christianity and religion. Um, but history is kind of evidence of what uh, the government and Christianity being entwined. So, if we're not careful, I think this is where we do want history to repeat itself. We do want America's founding to be preserved in what it was built on, and we have to urge God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second
It's not
is,
done to it.
yeah, and love your neighbor as yourself, and all the laws of the prophets hang on these two commandments. So, I mean, let's start there. I mean, love your God with all your heart and all your soul. Love your neighbors with all your heart and all your soul as well. And everything just kind of flows from there. And if we were to like to just take that into account, we would love one another. You know, we would understand this great commission that in what we're supposed to be doing as Christians in this world to each other, to our communities, and to get involved. I mean, we're called to do this. We're called to make disciples. We're called to share the gospel. We're called to teach obedience to Jesus. And you know, it's sad that we're not teaching that's the stuff that we should be teaching our kids. I
Yeah,
mean, that's what we're teaching our kids, but they're not teaching that in schools. I mean, if they are, and this is a
they're
curriculum
not.
that I've
Uh,
missed, I mean, I'm just not seeing it.
I can tell you from firsthand experience every day that they're not.
Yeah, right. Um, yeah, so we know it's not being done, and it leads to transform lives. It leads to kids growing in the gospel. That's what we're called to do, is make it, especially disciples of our kids, and then hopefully one day they're also being good stewards of the faith and producing the same fruit and sharing the gospel as well.
Yeah,
um
that's the whole point. I mean,
yeah, it's sad that we miss that point so much, and like
mhm.
we can go to politics, and as soon as you start talking politics, it's like, well, if we take out the whole religion part, everybody's just kind of at each other's throat,
And that
and they won't see, like I said, the stuff that we're
that's
doing.
that's that's another problem is because in a lot of my time, whether it's driving or just relaxing for a little bit, I listen to debates and arguments and stuff, and it's once you start to take religion or not just Christianity, but the absence of God or some higher power that sort of gives us our morality. You begin to fall into an extremely hypocritical worldview where you can't really determine what is right or wrong on anything other than your personal preference. And so that is why
Mm,
it is impossible to have politics without God. And so that's really where that argument starts to fall apart. And I don't think enough people have thought about it that way. But that's why it's our job to say that kind of stuff so that that message gets out there.
yeah, and since we've said it, that leads to the next point is, what should Christians be doing to be involved in politics? Because I mean, it's like, okay, well, I'm there, I have these feelings, I have this faith, I have this belief. Why should I be involved in it? Well, God cares deeply about justice and just and politics as the ultimate solution, leading everybody to one party or the other, isn't going to fix everything. And our be in princes or kings, as Psalm says. um uh
Mhm.
we really sit. Government is established by God for good purposes. Romans 13, describes governing authorities as instituted by God, to commend good, punish evil, and promote order. Plain as day. Loving your neighbor, compels action for common good. The second greatest commandment, as we were talking about a second ago, politics shapes the laws that directly affect our neighbors in protecting life, protecting the unborn, protecting the vulnerable, protecting our families, our religious freedoms, the poor, you name it. Like, there's just so many examples you could pull there. And just withdrawing from really means that we're allowing policies to harm uh, people without Christian input, such as the gender modification, the geoengineering. Right there. If we're not involved, we're allowing that stuff to harm our neighbors. We're not doing what we should because it calls us to step in the gap where we should be for the ones that can't. Be salt and light in every area of life. We've heard that.
Yeah.
Jesus calls us to be salt, preserving, and really flavoring society, if you will. And it's not limited to the church, or just personal evangelism, but it extends to the culture, it extends to your work, it extends to public life. The Bible is full of believers, influencing civil spheres of communities for God's glory. Joseph and Daniel served faithfully in pagan governments.
Mhm.
They were promoting justice and wisdom. Esther risked her life to save her people through political access. The early church leaders were showing civic participation, and how that has precedent in what we are doing. His people do just defend the weak, defend the widows, defend the orphans, defend strangers. And I'll stop right there. I think that's where people can, probably play the legal immigration card, as strangers in our country. And, like, that's, were your neighbors, say, were your neighbors the neighbors that were here first, or were your neighbors to your country illegally? And then, a lot of these folks are not great people. Some of them are good, don't get me wrong. But, many of these issues evolve from these issues we've seen now. That, I mean, I was reading something the other day where there's been like reports of human trafficking in like all 82 counties in Mississippi, which is a pretty scary thing.
Mhm.
But, we were to bring these biblical values into politics to kind of curb the injustice of these things that are going on. Um, Good citizen includes using God given rights and responsibility. In a representative system like the United States, we have the stewardship over their vote and their voice, um, with these guys that and girls that are elected in the office. I agree. We have to there's an amount of authority and respect that should go to it. We'll talk about that in a minute, but give to Caesar what is Caesar's. But being informed, voting, getting involved with the people who better align with biblical principles on key moral issues. Period. Like that's everything we were just talking about.
Yep.
Praying for these authorities, advocating for justly ways to obey God. A lot of these folks, I mean, I encourage them to sit there and to think about this stuff when they're taking these votes, like geoengineering, closing primaries, you know, um, school choice for parents. Um, is this really advocating for the ways of God and how we obey Him? Jesus paid taxes and engaged authorities without making politics his mission, but he didn't forbid civic participation either. It was just a part of life. That said, I think that there's some important cautions to kind of keep this engagement biblical and not keep it as just labeling ourselves as something just because we want to. And I think that's where, even conservative, Republican, Democrat, liberal, both sides lose sight of this because we we start to just put our allegiance in a party, and our ultimate allegiance should be to Christ kingdom. God said my kingdom is not of this world, and politics isn't the gospel.
Hmm.
It can't save our souls. It can't build churches. And we shouldn't idolize these parties or leaders or the outcomes of these policies as the end all be all, what some people make them out to be. But we do have to avoid compromise. We have to avoid, bitterness whenever things don't go our way. We need to engage it with integrity, primaries, election integrity, humility, truth, and love. And we have to prioritize the gospel as what political involvement should be and it shouldn't be. And it should never replace, most importantly, sharing the gospel, discipleship, church life, family life. I think we can agree that, this is what I've just been learning a lot lately about our church's primary mission is to make disciples. But that doesn't mean that we need to retreat, from public life, from the square. It's like, I mean, what did Charlie Kirk say? Like the most important thing is, teaching people about Jesus. Second most important thing is protecting the ability to teach people about Jesus. We are prioritizing the gospel, not being bitter
Hmm.
politics. But Christians are called to conquer these politics. I think we see too many of these elected officials. They kind of take it out of scope, and but to participate faithfully as voters, and stewards who love God and our neighbor, our withdrawal from it just kind of sometimes it tends to influence, those who don't share biblical values. And when we're not involved in it, we're not doing everybody justice. So so while getting engaged can, I think it can restrain the evil, and promote justice and point to Christ's lordship over all things. It can easily rub people wrong. So we do that and how we do that, which will kind of start to wrap it up and to tie us back to kind of why. Okay, so we're what church and state and how the separation of it was, and the origin and the history of it. What we as Christians should be doing, especially in politics. Um, the Bible doesn't use like as we said, that was later just kind of described in Jefferson's letter, but it does clearly distinguish the roles between, authorities, and the purposes of civil government and the church, like we just said. So, do you see that kind of shift? I mean, does this all make sense? Like, I mean, I feel like I'm kind of rambling, but it just like it kind of fires me up
Yeah,
where it's like I hear people saying like, "Oh, don't talk about politics, don't talk about church," and the same, and it's like we don't do that here, and it's just like that's what's wrong. Like
yeah.
that's
I
exactly what's wrong.
I completely agree. 100%. You know, God and faith used to be a focal point of, campaigns and politics and everything. And that's what we've been talking about this whole night is that the more that we have drifted from that, the more that our nation is like basically falling off of a cliff. I mean, so you're absolutely right. We have to turn back to God, and uh, we have to keep it in the center of conversation because our faith needs to be the driver of our politics, not the other way around.
Yeah, and completely the government, and don't get me wrong, like I get it, we're taxed too much, but we do, you know, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's and to God the things that are God's. And I think that just kind of draws the line, and where civil government has legitimate claims. But like we said, the ultimate allegiance just lies to God. And in John, my kingdom is not of this world. Um, it kind of, you know, Christ's rule is spiritual, it's eternal, um, and it's not enforced by worldly powers or political structures. And it's certainly not through coercion of the state like we see today, where it's like pushing, whether it's an ideology or policies that clearly, um, disregard the church and disregard religion, because there are policies that are, geoengineering. I'm just looking at this still, playing God with the weather. Um, and the list goes on and on. But I mean, you know, government as God's servant is really the way it was set up.
Hmm.
And my God, and like we said, it was to promote good, to punish evil, and to maintain order. And Christians should submit, to what our laws call for. But again, this assumes that the main authority is Jesus, and we're commanded to not just draw blind obedience to something, but to rather be a subject, for the Lord's sake, the human institutions, to honor everyone, to love our neighbors, like we said, but more importantly, to fear God. And I just wish that you know, we could tie these things together, because I mean, just even what we've said in the past 5-10 minutes, I'm like, okay, well, I have no other responsibility, and I know you, and me are pretty much on the same page of like, I mean, I don't feel like I have any other choice but to, first and foremost, like follow Christ, and to point as many people as I can to Christ, but also to get involved and to be involved in showing people, where God, and government are supposed to be, all intertwined, and religion is supposed to be in there intertwined. And I feel like I don't have a choice but to get involved, and to be involved, and to promote civic engagement, and to get people discussing this stuff, and to expose evil. We're going to get into that a lot more in the coming weeks when we see some of the stuff that's kind of coming out. But again, it's our posture as Christians, and how we're, where we're submitting, where we don't compromise, where we're not silent, um, and where we're really just we're trying to take the spiritual kingdom of explaining to people. It says it right here. You're supposed to be involved, and you're supposed to be engaged. And if we were not so concerned with what party we're in, but looking at what the Bible says, like you can't argue against that. And, protecting the unborn, taking care of our borders, taking care of our neighbors right here at home. This is all like framework of religious liberties and also protecting the exercise of a faith that allows Christians to participate in politics, without idolizing or demonizing government. Because I know it's easy to go to extremes, whether you're on the right or whether you're on the left. Um, it's super easy for it to be taken out of context, and it's super easy, um, you know, for religious freedom and political involvement to kind of take over one way or the other. But I mean, I just feel like they should be
Yeah.
in almost perfect balance. And that perfect balance is just kind of right in the middle. If you look at a scope and methods graph of like where people are on a political chart, it's I guess the case. But I mean, I just kind of see it as like, I look at it now and I'm just like cross, and just kind of being right in the middle of the cross.
Hmm.
Um and we'll really start to wrap it up here. And it's kind of one last thing I want to kind of talk about is um how labeling ourselves can also be pretty dangerous because I think that we I often ask like should we keep labeling ourselves um as Republicans or as Democrats because you know we're trying to reach everybody. I think that's the point to understand, first and foremost that this is like a faith-based movement to understand where we align, where and where we align being as followers of Christ, but how we should be involved in promoting the right versus wrong, the principles over party. Um, and taking on the wrong label, I think, this is something we talked about in church can really cause us to miss what God is calling us to do. If we're just focused so much on just the party or just the policy. I've been there, I've done that, I've worked on campaigns where it's just like, why don't these people get it? Like, why don't they understand? Like, this is bad policy, or this is theft, or they're cheating, or they're corrupt, and you get frustrated, and it's so easy. Um, you know, I think if we get too tied up in that to miss it, and then it becomes even easier to alienate everybody and to alienate your neighbor. um I was having this conversation with someone tonight where it's like, well, that's they said that's what the Bible does. It kind of alienates people. And I was like, I don't know if I agree with that, because we were talking about how, I think I said this earlier, where politics kind of operates in a gray space, and they're like, well, Jesus kind of operated in a gray space. And I was like, well, I don't know if I agree with that either. I think that there is pretty clear distinctions on what was right and what was wrong. And yeah, I think we have to acknowledge and understand and realize that a lot of this world and politics does operate in a gray space, but it wasn't meant to, and it certainly can't stay there. And while we're not trying to necessarily create labels to create division, we do have to create the most important label as followers of Christ, because that's what he was trying to do. I mean, that
Mhm.
was the whole point. It wasn't to, God didn't come out and say, "Hey, I'm Republican or I'm a Democrat or I'm a liberal." Like, no, first of all, you're a sinner. Second of all, there's no other way to get saved but through me. And
Mhm.
that applies for everybody. Um, I asked the question, this is another thing that we discussed. Asked John, who are you? And I think it goes the same for our elected officials when are they pointing at the right thing? Is their focus really on the right thing? Are they concerned with the right thing? And they have to ask themselves, and I think that's, once we get more um closer to election time, we're able to get um some more interviews and people on, and we'll start doing some questions with senators at some of our meetings to get, we want these guys to feel convicted, we want them to feel accountable. um but most importantly, I want them to be asking themselves, um you know what's your identity when it comes to Christ, and who has he called you to be?
Mhm.
um wh- you know for me, that's tough because we want, again, like, we want to be political, and I say it's tough because we want people to understand that maybe we see what's right. Fortunately, I believe that the policies and the things that I believe in are where my identity is because of what I study and what it says in scripture and what I know to be true, how I try to live my life, where I prioritize my time. I'm not perfect by any means. I mess up every day, but I'm constantly every day trying to find my identity because I want to be able to point people to God and point people in the right direction the best I can. And it begs the question, are our elected officials being those same messengers? I think there's some. I think there's some really good ones out there, and I think we have some really good ones. But are they being the messengers of you know the gospel, and are they being the witnesses that they should be? Are our bosses at work, are they being the same witnesses? I feel really fortunate to work for some people right now that we make sure that when we hire somebody, we're like, look, part of our handbook is that we honor God and we're thankful because he's allowed us to work and to enjoy the fruits of our labor. We're not pushing it on anybody, but we have to acknowledge that first and
Mhm.
foremost. And I think that plants a little seed in our new hires of, okay, like, I'm not pushing it on you, but you know, we're trying to point that way, um of who's really in authority. Like, yeah, we're your boss, yeah, we're the company, or there's corporate, there's district, whatever, but who's really in authority, who's really in control here? Let's point that out. Let's point it out that we understand who that is, and we're all trying to live by that as we mentor you, as we lead you, as we train you, as we guide you through the job. I think our pastors definitely should be doing that, obviously. But, like I said, our elected officials should be doing that too. So, and just think about that. and when it comes to being right. It's not what you claim, but it's what you refuse. We can all claim to be, followers of Christ, but are we refusing, the things that he called us to stay away from, and the life that we are called to live? And I think our elected officials should ask that to themselves a lot more. You know, eh, are you refusing these policies, or are you just claiming to be, in authority because you were elected to be there? And I think that's kind of where they're at. They're like, I was elected to be here. That means I can just um make these choices because I'm here now. And most of them are just worried about getting reelected, and they don't really care about anything else. And some of them, back to labels, wear these labels of politicians or elected officials or successful or powerful. And this resonated with me pretty deep too, because I mean, we all do that. We all say, like, I'm successful, or you know, blessed, or, which may not fall in the same category, but, I'm athletic, or whatever the case may be. Powerful. And I think they begin to feel spiritual, in that they're thinking that that is just kind of the end all be all, and they kind of create this complex of um screw what everybody else has to, say or think. We're just going to do what we want. I think that you can be humble and confident at the same time.
Hmm.
I've heard that before. I heard it in church this Sunday. I told somebody that tonight, that um you should be. Um, but again, a person who won't stand in the light can't be controlled by it. Think
Yeah.
about that. Like, somebody that doesn't want to be in the light, whether it's elected officials, whether it's somebody in authority, somebody that isn't willing to expose themselves to it, can never be controlled by the good, because they're constantly, you know, doing stuff behind closed doors, doing stuff in secret, or really meaning that they're hiding in their bad ways, and they're always just going to follow that corruption. Um, the evil that we see transpiring in government, in the world. And you can see it. I think you can see it in some of these elected officials, when they're like, "I'm right here, like, I'll talk about it, like, I'm not scared. um I'll go to your town hall." I told those senators the other night, I'm like, I commend you for coming here and having this discussion, and not being afraid to come and talk about things. But just know that you're in God's house, because we have our meetings in
Mhm.
churches.
Yep.
And you are now putting yourself in the light. So I hope you're going to allow yourself to be controlled by it, and not by, evil ways or corruption. And because the spotlight's on you now, our eyes are on you now. um Probably went a little bit too far by saying, if I'll run against you if you're doing something you're not supposed to. Know that, like, look, um it is what it is. And these people have to understand that, um you know we don't need them to just be elected officials because they're there, and then once they're there, that's it. We need them to be calling people, as well as to follow Jesus. And I wish that they would do that more, because I think they would be convicted by it more. I think, I understand where, I guess, it'd be easy to get into these positions, and then just to fall into the fallacy of, scratch my back, I scratch yours, or taking money from lobbyists, or not, being someone in a position of prosecuting evil and not doing it. It makes guys, I think, lose hope whenever they're not able uh to follow up on this stuff. So, it's kind of all I got, man. I know I
Yeah.
kind of went off there, but
No,
I just wanted to.
dude, I mean, it was great. I didn't want to interrupt you. I mean, you're killing it. So I think that's the message that we need to have, just the large sense, just in general, the discussion question, if you will, is, you know, we need to turn to God. We need to turn back to God. I think that's something we can get all of us can get behind. Because like the Ten Commandments argument in school is like, well, what exactly is wrong with the Ten Commandments? Even if you don't believe in God or the Christian God, what exactly is wrong with living up to the standards of the Ten Commandments? Thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not, etc. So I think that's awesome. I think this has been a great episode. We'll put out a couple posts tomorrow on Facebook and everything, linking this and everything. So we thank y'all for tuning in. And we will see y'all next week. God bless y'all.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thanks for being on. Hope everybody has a good night, and we will see you next week, Lord willing.
Amen. See y'all.
Take care, man.